He needs a suspension lift. You don't know how many times people have commented that on this channel. Today I'm going to tell you how a lift ruins your ride off-road.
Are you serious?
I'm in trouble.
What the hell? What did you just...
So when the keyboard off-roaders see and hear all that banging and clanging, of course they're going to comment that a lift kit is the solution to all that noise and carnage that you hear. Nothing could be further from the truth. One of the biggest myths about a lift kit is that it's going to raise the undercarriage of the vehicle so you won't hit things like your rear differential. The best way to explain that that is false is to imagine the typical monster truck you've seen on the road a million times, where the truck is jacked up and lifted in the air, but the rear differential is down on the ground. The ground clearance didn't change. The lift kit didn't raise the vehicle enough to clear the differential. The next myth surrounds tire size. You lift the vehicle so you can fit a bigger tire. How are you going to fit a bigger tire if the wheel well on the vehicle itself is only so big? The limiting factor is the sheet metal of the vehicle itself. You got to hacksaw it apart to get a bigger tire, and there's no way around it. You're going to hit the wheel well. This is why when you see your typical mall crawler lift kit with the big tires stuffed in there and they look all cool, but you know when they go off-road that's not going to work. They're going to be rubbing those tires when they're under suspension compression, and that tire gets jammed up inside the wheel well. It's going to be rubbing, and that's dangerous on a trail. Then comes the argument that a lift kit will give you more articulation. That is false. It botches articulation, which we're going to talk about. A lift kit botches center of gravity because when you raise the vehicle up with the spring, all you're doing is tricking the suspension to think that it's already down in the hole. And what that means is the vehicle is going to be tippy off-road instead of staying level, which is crucial when you're off-roading.
So what do I mean by staying level off-road? Take a look at the rear axle, the driver's rear here, and you're going to see the wheel articulation as we're going up this black diamond trail. It may not look like it's much on camera, but this is a black diamond trail. Now we're playing around with the exposure here so you can see that back driver's wheel. Look at that articulation there. The wheel and the suspension are undulating and conforming to the road, and it's keeping the vehicle relatively level for what's going on, and a lot is going on here. If this vehicle was lifted, that suspension is just not going to articulate as much, and instead of the wheels and suspension moving and dancing around and the body staying straight, the body of the vehicle itself would dance around and tumble around way more than you see here. We're going to overexpose the video and show you a replay here, and again, pay careful attention to the rear axle here. So now on the passenger side, check out as the wheel drops right there into a hole, you see a huge amount of wheel articulation, and the vehicle remains relatively flat. In other words, the vehicle itself doesn't dive down into the hole. The wheel instead dives down in the hole. What does that mean to you? It means more control off-road. It means less tippiness. It means more confidence. It means that your line, such as this, going up the side of the hill on the passenger side here without tipping. Just look at that. You don't have to worry about rolling over. Here's another look. We're just going to climb. Look at that articulation back there. We're going to climb this passenger side, not worry about tipping over, because everything is going to remain relatively flat. So wheel articulation is the name of the game here. It affects so much. Now this hill is steep. Again, it's not going to show on camera, but it also, in addition to being steep and rocky, it kind of wants to dump you off to the driver's side or to the left side of your screen here. But watch the vehicle. Just watch the body of the vehicle as we're going up this. Notice how relatively flat this thing stays. Look at this. Just the body of the vehicle. Okay?
Because in order to raise the vehicle, again, we got to put a longer, stiffer spring in order to raise the vehicle off the ground. You could already imagine that a stiffer spring is not going to want to flex or articulate as easy as a OEM spring that was designed by engineers to remain in some sort of balance or harmony.
Here we have another flat graded dirt road. No, in reality, this is straight up. It is very rocky, very steep, and extremely rutted. And as we go up here, you're going to see that the car is going to dive into a few holes here. The rear passenger is going to go down in the hole right there, and it's going to go into another hole right there. And the vehicle remains relatively flat. I know that looked tame on camera, but a lifted vehicle would have been a lot more tipsy on this obstacle.
Once you go lifting the vehicle, it's going to ruin the ride. This is what everybody who lifts a vehicle keeps secret, because they don't want to tell you that by lifting the vehicle, they screw up the caster and camber angles, and so the steering becomes stupidly heavy or weirdly loose like bump steer. It's just absolutely horrible to drive. And since it's horrible to drive, then comes the cat chasing its tail corrections. So you have to do your upper control arms and new ball joints to try to regain and correct the lost geometry from the botched suspension lift just to get it back to normal again. A lift kit on the back, as stated, is never going to raise that rear differential up higher off the ground. On the front, on an independent front suspension like this, technically if you raise the front, it will raise the low-hanging front differential up a little bit. But as I just stated, it'll screw up all the steering geometry, and then it needs to be corrected with other debauchery. And ironically, one of the ways to fix raising the vehicle up too much in the front is to install a differential drop kit. I'm not making this up. They lift the front of their vehicle to clear the front differential, but because it botches the suspension geometry so much, they have to then lower the diff back down with a diff drop kit in order to unbotch what they just botched. So if you weren't following that, they raised the front of their vehicle to clear the diff, but then screwed it up, so they have to lower the diff. Now, if you are a Toyota fanboy or fangirl, you know why I'm laughing, and that is the Land Cruisers for the past 25 years have always had the lowest part on the vehicle being that front differential. When you hear me banging that off-road, it's that front differential skid plate. Banging on it. It's not a petting zoo. Ow! So imagine installing a lift kit to raise the vehicle to clear all that, and having to install the diff drop kit to fix this, and then you're back to where you started again. The biggest keyboard off-roader and over-glamper misconception about real off-roading is that they think we straddle rocks. We don't. We climb rocks. Without that understanding, there's a tendency to think, oh yeah, when you off-road, you just lift yourself up high into the air, and then you just straddle over everything, and just away you go. Through actual off-road driving, you realize no matter what type of 4x4 you're in, you're going to climb over those rocks, and a lift is the last thing on your mind. The only way to truly lift your vehicle is bigger tires. Things like Jeep Wranglers with their huge wheel wells can experience rubbing if too big of a tire is stuck inside that wheel well, which leads me to the grand irony of what we're even talking about today, which is lifting lifted vehicles. Yeah, that's right. Every stock 4x4 is already lifted. In the 1980s, when we saw a Jeep and a Land Cruiser, we said, whoa, look at that stock Jeep and Land Cruiser, it's lifted. In the 90s, we saw a Jeep and a Land Cruiser, it's lifted. In the 2000s, we saw a Hummer and Jeep and again Land Cruisers, stock, wow, it's lifted. Right around 2015, wow, look at that stock Land Cruiser and stock 4Runner and stock Jeep Wrangler, it's not lifted. What happened? Where did the perception change come into play? Oh yes, the overglamping industrial complex. And the overlanding industrial complex is concerned with one thing, and that's selling you crap. So suddenly, stock Land Cruisers and stock Wranglers and stock G-Wagons and stock Land Rovers and stock Ineos Grenadiers and stock Ford Broncos are suddenly not lifted and need to be built by the customer in order to fix the incompetence of all the engineers from those manufacturers I just listed. And the overlanding industrial complex has turned lift kits into 4x4 high heels for men. That was a little gangster, but I had to say it. So what do? Tires and wheel wells. That's all you can max out. If you look at things like side-by-sides, they have no wheel wells on them. It's just tires, and then the suspension can articulate up and down a lot, and you got big tires that aren't going to interfere with any sort of wheel well. Outside of doing anything extreme like that on a stock 4x4 that's mass-produced, you're going to have to accept that once you max out your tire size within whatever wheel well you have, that no lift is going to clear you under the important stuff under the bottom that's scraping all the time. Ergo, we must go back to the basics, which is driver technique. The World War II original Jeep had something like 8.2 inches of ground clearance. Jeep Wranglers had 8-point-something inches of ground clearance all the way up through the 2000s, the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. Same thing with the Land Cruisers, 8-point-something inches of ground clearance. Hence the trifecta of center of gravity, ground clearance, and wheel articulation, engineering zen of all off-road 4x4 manufacturers. If you elect to go ahead and change that, you are botching more than you may realize. And then the cat chasing its tail to fix problems that you created starts. And then you end up hate watching channels like this of somebody doing in a stock height vehicle. Now the point here today is not to tell you what to do with your vehicle or to not lift it. Instead, it is to bring things back down here on Earth in actual reality, where the trifecta of wheel articulation, ground clearance, and center of gravity are the name of the game when you're off-roading. Ground clearance is just 1/3 of the equation. When manufacturers design these vehicles, it's about bringing all of those things into balance and harmony. I've had lifted vehicles before, I've had lowered vehicles before, and I've had everything in between before. What I found is, generally speaking, when you mess around with the suspension, it botches things. And few are willing to admit this to themselves because of the cash and time invested into doing these, quote, upgrades.
A lift kit is nothing more than a longer coil spring, period. But this video is not about focusing on bad things that happen with a lift. Instead, it's about focusing on all the good things that many people miss out on by lifting a vehicle that has been engineered correctly from the manufacturer.